Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Amma ba'da, habati fillah. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to our study of Usool al-Sunnah, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, rahmatullahi alayhi rahmatin wasi'ah. And we were last discussing the issue of rebelling against the Muslim ruler and takfeer of the Muslim ruler. And we were saying that that is the manhaj umuman in general of the Khawarij and the Takfiriyin. And one of the issues we didn't discuss is how some of the classical scholars, of course, there's a difference. And the scholars wrote in their books of fiqh about the issue of the Khawarij versus what are called the Bughat, the rebels. And rebels, in general, as a difference between the two, the Khawarij are people who have an aqidah and a manhaj, a methodology and an aqidah going against Ahl-Sunnah, and they make takfeer of people of the major sins, and then other traits. And the Bughat, maybe it's just a political vehicle of rebelling, and that they, so it's just maybe a political, of removing the leader and so forth. Both of those ways are madhmuma, they're sinful, and they are against the madhab of the Salaf and against the book and the Sunnah. But however, the Salaf did distinguish between the two, and it is worthy of noting. But generally, what you find in contemporary times is you find mainly people with Khawarij-like ideology, in that they speak and rebel and make takfir of the Muslim rulers, versus people who just, it's just simply a political, that they were rebelling for whatever reason. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Most of the people, though, we find when we look at a lot of these groups and sects in contemporary times, is that they have Khawarij-like tendencies and they make takfir. They accompany it with an aqidah, a particular creed, component of creed in their ideology. And may Allah protect us all from that. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So going back to what Imam Ahmad, because we'll just reason, because this is all where we stopped last time. We were explaining and bringing from the Sharh of Sheikh Muhyiddin just one of the points. So now we'll bring the beginning point we began with, and then this point where we left off. So he said, وَسَمْعِ وَطَاعَ لِأَئِمَّةِ وَأَمِيرُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ برَّ وَالْفَاجِرِ. So he says, and hearing and obeying the imams and the leader of the Muslims, whether he be righteous or wicked, and he who takes responsibility of the Khalifa and upon what the Muslims are united and pleased with, as well as he who seizes control over them by way of the sword until he becomes the Khalifa and is referred to as the chief of the believers. So meaning that whatever means that is achieved by establishing the new leader, the new Khalifa or the new leader, that it becomes, when that person is seated in that position, it becomes an obligation to hear and obey them, that they are now the Muslim ruler of that country, or the Khalifa of the Muslimin. And so then they have the right of hearing and obeying. He then goes on to say, rahmatullahi alayhi, and we talked about that extensively in the last sitting. He says, وَالْغَزُو مَاضٍ مَعَ الْأَمِيرِ إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ وَالْبَرِّ وَالْفَجْرِ لَا يُتْرَكْ. Likewise, participating in battles along with the rulers is binding until the day of judgment, whether they be righteous or wicked, and it is not to be abandoned. So you see quite a difference if you look at the contemporary Khawarij and the classical Khawarij and those Takfiri sects. You see quite a difference between them and Ahl-Sunnah in this regard, whereas they make takfir of the leaders. They say there's no Muslim rulers. Maybe some of them now in this day, they'll say, well, Afghanistan sounds good. Maybe they're Muslim, maybe they're the only Muslim leaders. Others would have said, Al-Qaeda or Daesh or ISIS, they're the only legitimate Muslim authority. So this is what you have generally amongst the takfiriyin and these contemporary Khawarij. So they just make blanket takfir pretty much. And their bellies will never be filled with takfir, with blood. And with that being the case, we see quite a difference in what Imam Ahmad said and what imams of the Salaf used to say. And Imam Ahmad, what did he say? Well, ghazul, madin mal emir ila yawm al-qiyamah. Likewise, participating in battles along with the rulers is binding until the day of judgment. And then what did he say? Because this is the ishkal that these takfiri say, whether they be righteous or wicked, meaning they could be a wicked leader. Yes, they can be wicked. The Prophet ﷺ described that there would come a time when there are leaders with the hearts of devils, or like they're devils in the ishkal, in the shape of men. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. But he gave us the usool, he gave us the qawaid, he gave us the principles of how we should deal with them. And that it's through patience. And it's through supplicating for them, for their guidance. And that if they are a legitimate Muslim ruler, they have a right over you, even if they are wicked and they do oppression and they are sinful. And all of those things, all of that falls under what Imam Ahmad said, wa ghazu madin mal amir al-yawm al-qiyamah al-barri wal-fajiri, regardless of whether he's righteous or wicked. All of that falls under wickedness, but it does not take you out of the fold of Islam. That's the point. As long as the leader is in the fold of Islam, then they have this right. They don't lose this right. And all of those ahadith of Rasulillahi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that we mentioned, asami wa ta'ala mariya al-muslimi fima yuhibbu wa kariya, ma lam yu'miru bi ma'siyatin fi idha umira bi ma'siyatin fala sam'a wa la ta'a. Hearing and obeying the Muslim authority, as long as he commands you with obedience to Allah, and if he commands you with disobedience to Allah, there's no hearing and obeying, meaning in those issues in which he has you disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as long as they are still in the fold of Islam, and there's a lot of ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that give you some of the tafsir, because the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in, they asked about some of these issues. What if they're wicked? What if they are what if how should we ta'amul ma'hum? How should we deal with them? And then the Prophet ﷺ said, as long as they establish the prayer. And then other narrations you mentioned that as long as there's no outward disbelief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you have burhan, that it's no ashkal. There's no question about it being disbelief. And again, this would be from Ahl al-Ilmi. Laysa kullu ahad, not everyone, to just get involved in that and entertain themselves at the expense of Muslim countries and Muslim leaders. Wallahu musta'an, even if there's wickedness. Okay, so this is the really the shahid here, and this is a big difference between Ahl Sunnah and Ahl al-Bid'ah and all the ahkam that go with that. So Sheikh Muhyiddin, he comments about this section. He says, I say, participating in battles refers to jihad if the ruler calls for it. And jihad is such that its virtues is well known. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that it is the apex of the affair of Islam. And jihad is of two types: defensive jihad and offensive jihad. Defensive meaning you're defending your Muslim land, or the boundaries of the Caliphate or whatever from the attack, or offensive meaning that the leader calls for that. So what is apparent is that what is intended here is the offensive jihad. As for the defensive jihad, then it is obligatory upon every individual. If the enemy attacks the land, everyone must defend themselves. Even the woman must defend herself and her honor. Similarly, if robbers were to attack a person, then he may defend himself if he is able and with whatever means he has at his disposal, as shall come, if Allah, inshallah ta'ala, in the section that deals with fighting against highway robbers, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So that's how Imam Sheikh Muhyiddin ended that section of the treatise of what Imam Ahmad mentioned about the issue of the leaders. And as we said, in so many kutub, in the books of the Salaf, you'll find this. This is why we say it's codified. It's codified in the books of the Salaf. And we find that it is, it's manhajiyan, it's methodological, and it comes from, as we gave you some of those nusus, we gave you from the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the speech of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is referred to as wahyain. It's referred to as revelation. We didn't say, well, our sheikh now says, a sheikh in London says, a sheikh in Birmingham says, a sheikh in Croydon says, well, we have a sheikh in Indonesia, he said, we have a sheikh in Australia, he said, a mubtadi in New Zealand said. No, we don't. We went to the book and the Sunnah. For this issue, we went to the Quran, we went to the Sunnah, and then we went with a few aqwal of the Salaf, and we could have, made it tall, made it an extensive mas'ala, but I think the point has been made, I hope, inshallah. Imam Ahmad said, rahmatullahi alayhi, and the division of the war booty and the establishment of the prescribed punishments being the responsibility of the rulers is continuously binding. Now, this has another value for us. So we'll see what Sheikh Muhyiddin comments. He says, this is also a principle from the principles of Ahl-Sunnah. So this is why this is mentioned here. Why is all of a sudden we're talking about the Sharia and the hudud and stuff like this? He goes on to say, this is also a principle from the principles of Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah. The prescribed punishments are such that no one can establish them except the ruler, and the affairs to be taken to him in order to preserve lives, unify the word of the Muslims, and out of obedience to Allah, as well as to oppose the innovators from the Khawarij, Kilab an-Nar, the dogs of the hellfire, and all praises for Allah. The affair is clear to the believer. This is a very important point, and I'm glad we read what Sheikh Muhyiddin said in that very concise paragraph that he mentioned, because it brings to light what we've experienced, especially in America, because America has a unique history, and more so than the UK in this regard, or some other Western countries, perhaps. Okay, this is one analysis of history, but I can say at least in the 20th century and 21st century, that America, has had a tradition of rebelling and civil disobedience and so forth in various movements. And so even in the Islamic context, in that we had probably in the even from the early, probably some of the earlier Muslim communities that we know, that we have more documentation, or we can see. I'm sure there was from the slave communities and others, but we have less information and sources for that as far as the documentation and what, but what we do have is we have probably from even the 1920s, maybe 1930s, 1940s, you've had different infusions and mixes. Most of these groups were not even Muslim, but they took concepts of Islam. And at the most famous of them would be, of course, the Nation of Islam. And before the Nation of Islam, you had groups like the Moorish Science Temple. You had, even the Five Percenters, I think came, I'm not sure if I think they might have come after the Nation, but you had various groups, especially in the African-American community, who were mixing aspects of Islam with other religions, and maybe Masonic beliefs, all kind of things. And the point being, because of the oppression that they experience, and we've experienced as a people in the history in the country, that this has produced a certain orientation. Even the churches have had a long history of revolutionary movement. They weren't all just turn the other cheek. They have been big centers of civil disobedience, protest, all of those things. Okay. And later day generations, those who came into the fold of Islam, you had some groups that were like cult like members, like the uh, 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 Sheikh Abu Amina Bilal Phillips. He did a very powerful refutation of one of the groups, the Ansar cult, okay, which was actually devastating for them. So Jazallah khairan in this regard, in that it helped to dismantle, in a sense, possibly that movement and expose them. So anyhow, you had a lot of traditions of these groups and these secret societies. And then you moved up onto many other groups, and we still have some of this where a lot of groups, they kind of have an Ikhwan Muslimin orientation and this rebellion and this political movement where they have the secret bay'ah. They give the secret pledge of allegiance to a particular leader. So we've had many communities, Jamil al-Amin, may Allah free him and guide him, who is one of the big sheikhs in America that has a very big and powerful, probably had a big and powerful movement. I don't know what the status now. He's been in prison for some time. You had others from his time, from that culture. You got to realize a person like Jamil al-Amin, and I know we're going to get off contact, but we're going to bring this back to you, and maybe you'll get a little history too. Jamil al-Amin, his I don't know if that's his birth name, but his well-known name before being Jamil al-Amin and Imam Jamil al-Amin was H. Rap Brown. He's a very famous civil rights movement activist. Perhaps you might even say Black revolutionary. And so they come from the tradition of the Black Panther Party and some of these other groups. Now, why is this relevant to what we're talking about? This is very relevant to give you an idea of case studies in America, because I'm American, so I can tell you, and maybe some Americans will find value. Maybe others will find value just from the point of history. But it also is very much in light of this, of what it tells you about the relationship with some of the contemporary movements and Takfeer ideologies and some of the issues. So now why I'm getting into this is also, as Imam Ahmad said, the division of the war booty and the establishment of the prescribed punishments being the responsibility of the rulers is continuously binding. So as Sheikh Muhyiddin mentioned, that this is the role of the Muslim ruler. So as I said, we have all of these movements that we've had in the history in America, and still have some, but especially they were prominent probably coming out in the when people became more to, moving from the Nation of Islam to the War Deen community to, so, probably in the 70s, 80s, things like this, and 90s and what have you. You had a lot of these groups breaking, and they had this revolutionary zeal because of their cultural experience, and they brought that to Islam, and they were using Islam to try to navigate that. In fact, Jamil al-Amin, he has a book called Revolution by the Book. And the point is a lot of those groups, they have the secret bay'ah. And this is also a pillar of what you say, Ikhwan Muslimin. And with that, for them, a part of their movement, we had it in Seattle as well. I was a part of that movement, I guess, but I did not have the bay'ah. I did not have the Pledge of Allegiance. So I was kind of considered outside, although I functioned in tight-knit communities. So I ran with the brothers who had the bay'ah. I moved with them. If there was defending the community, I was there. If there was anything that they needed, some of the things that I was unaware of, but could have easily got me probably thrown in prison or something, I was a part of that. But I was not a card-carrying member because I didn't take the bay'ah. I never accepted the Pledge of Allegiance because I didn't think that was something I had to do, and that was Islamic. I had a problem. I had reservations. I didn't have knowledge, but I just didn't have I had reservations. The point is those movements, they spread throughout America, and one of the pillars that you'll find is that they tried to implement the hudud to a greater or lesser extent. Some of the communities, especially on the East Coast, where it's a lot more Muslims, even in probably here in the past, you had different variations of these communities that they tried to, they would have the secret Pledge of Allegiance, and they would try to establish Islamic movement slash sort of government. So in their hoods, in their neighborhoods, you would find that these masajid in communities, that they would try to somewhat operate as governments. They command the good and forbid the evil. For those who know who Imam Siraj Wahaj, he has a lot of history. Those guys, his masjid in New York, Masjid Taqwa, that though, they have a lot of history, but in all the communities of reverts, especially African-American communities in the hood, so to speak, they almost all have some sort of history. If they have any kind of distance, any kind of history, they have that type of, history where they would clean up neighborhoods to a degree. They would have an effect on the thing, giving dawah, but also, hey, you can't sell drugs here. And maybe they had conflict and clashes, shootouts, whatever else with the local drug dealers and things like this. And this has been a big part of the history of in a lot of those communities. And that could be whether you're in Oakland, California, whether you're in LA, whether you're even in Seattle, to the greater or lesser extent. I mean, brother, we had enough incidents. We never probably to that degree, almost shootouts, enough times where the brothers got their shotguns and looking down, and if those guys come out of their car and want to harm the brothers there downstairs, it's a done deal, and they're going to be in the newspaper. So we've had plenty of those type of things. In the New York, Philadelphia, they've got the movements, they've got the bodies, okay, and a lot of places in America. And so what you find, and you found this even in some of the communities that oriented towards Salafia as well, and one of the most famous that I'm aware of would be Abu Muslima in East Orange, New Jersey, because they used to try to implement the hududs. For example, if someone is a wife beater, he's called to the office. Big Abdullah, whose hands are as big as both of mine put together, gives you a little bit of, metes out a little punishment in the office. Then the guy leaves and goes beats his wife in the parking lot or something crazy. Countless stories. And those brothers from East Orange can give you interesting details about all the major things, in those things. And all those communities have that type of history. I think a lot of them in Philly, in New York, in Jersey, and probably even in LA and those kind of places too. And so one of the issues you had with a lot of these movements, they couldn't protect their communities. They don't have Islamic states, but they tried to implement aspects of the Islamic states. And one of the things being the hudud. There has been murder. There has been all of those things that happened. And they thought they were in the name of Islam. And that those issues, of course, were muharram and cause a greater fitna for the Muslims, causing people to be wanted by the law, causing sisters who didn't know anything to be married to guys who were wanted criminals by the FBI around the country. Countless stories we could talk about. And the issue is, it's this issue. I know a beloved brother to me who, alhamdulillah, he died upon Salafiyah, Allah yarhamuhu, and he used to tell me about the stories that he experienced in LA, and that they used to have a community in the desert. And they thought that, and this has been a shubhat for many years. So they would take the issue of concubines and they would take that in America. So then they would have, 5, 10 girlfriends, and they would even maybe try to live together. They would do all kind of crazy stuff, thinking that was their right hand's possession. Okay. Some of them may have believed it. Some of them, it was just their desires. And the point is those kind of things are realities. Those are a reality in the history, that those kind of things happened, and plenty of hudud. Oh, you've been messing with the brothers, take them out to the desert. I don't know, disappear him, or at least cause him grievous bodily harm. So this is very real. And also within the community. Oh, the wife, she committed zina, she disappears. Okay. Akramakum Allah. And these are real issues that we have at least secondhand, almost firsthand knowledge, you could say. So these kind of travesties and this type of fitna has been long-standing. We find this even in the West, that the fitna and why it has a different kind of relevance for us as Muslim communities in the West is because we see this. Us in America, especially. Okay, maybe in the UK, they might have had some gradations of this as well. You had a lot of brothers run around saying it's Dar al Harb. I've seen brothers, he's got brand new clothes on. You're like, Ahi, where'd you get that? That's a nice jacket. Oh, I stole it from a disbeliever. Or I stole it from this place. I stole it from this place. Thinking that what they were doing, this criminal element, was actually a part of Islam. And before you make total judgments on this, you also have to realize the context that what you have now, as far as the knowledge of Islam and the way you have a lot of information. We live in an age beyond the information age. You could type up anything and you can learn what not to do and what to do, and you can learn bid'ah and you can learn disbelief. It's all there. But in an age prior to the internet, when there wasn't a lot of teaching and people left gang life, they left this life, they left that life, they were pimps, they were drug dealers, they were whatever. And then they come to Islam and there's no one really to teach them. These are kind of some of the things that can be the result of that. That was a part of the history. It's a part of the building process. It made us who we are today. So those things, the point being, I guess, with bringing it all back home, is that these things, as Sheikh Muhyiddin mentioned, and first Imam Ahmad, as he's explaining, that this iqamat al-hudud, iqamat al-had, establishing the Islamic principles is for the Muslim ruler, and you don't have you cannot implement that in Western countries or a country you're a Muslim minority. You can't protect the Muslim communities. You're not governing. You're not self-governing. You're not autonomous. You can't just go around thinking you can implement this from the hudud and that from the hudud, and you can implement this and you can implement that. And that was one of the things even you find a lot of the contemporary takfiris at the Ru'usim. One of the heads of them that you find in the West would have been Faisal Jamaica and some of his outlandish statements. If the person, this hypocrite, runs to Buckingham Palace, you got to go in there after him and kill him, and all these kind of crazy things. So this is where those things came from. For those who know and those who don't know, now you know something about it. And those are dangerous. It's very dangerous. It's very dangerous, and it's very important to know what you can do as a Muslim minority, versus what is the role in an Islamic state. That these things go back to the Muslim ruler, and even if you're in a Muslim state, you can't just go around doing anything that you want. You found someone doing this, so you're going to implement some punishment or this. No, that's what they have. Muslim courts, they have Muslim judges, they have an infrastructure based on the book and the Sunnah, based on the Sharia, and that's how it's adjudicated. It's not just for anyone to say, oh my gosh, so and so was doing this wicked sin and they need to be punished. No, these things, they go through a procedure and a process in a Muslim country. Even the ones that are not implementing the Sharia as much. For example, if you went to Yemen or Egypt or whatever, have the gradations in a lot of the countries on how they implement Sharia laws and so forth. And you cannot just take the law into your own hands. That's for the Muslim rulers, Muslim authorities. There's a procedure, there's a process. Islam does not teach chaos and fawda. And let me, a last point I want to mention regarding having the secret pledge of allegiance and that being kind of a pillar of Ikhwan Muslimin and some of the other groups. Many of the groups, like I said in the past, had this. Another real life problem that we found in America, because think about this. If you've got your bay'ah to Siraj Wahaj, for example, I'm making Imam Siraj, I don't know if he ever had the bay'ah, but he may have in the past. But anyhow, a lot of those big leaders. So now you in your community has the bay'ah to him. Then you have another community, say in New York, in another part of Siraj, they're in Brooklyn, another part in, whatever, some other Manhattan or something. And then they have a leader and they make the bay'ah. Now, if those two imams have discord, have any issues, they fall out, you have whole communities that fall out. And a lot of times, unfortunately, because people have those other elements from prior to Islam or whatever, it causes another problem. There could be violence, it can escalate, and we've had that. We lived it in America. You know, this is just the history, especially in the East Coast, but even here, even up into Seattle, where we had Muslims hunting other Muslims because of this Hizbiyah, because they were a part of a movement, the Dar, or the other, the Fuqara. These are also famous groups that probably, I don't know when they came out of the 80s or the 70s, I'm not sure. But they were different movements, and these movements having their secret societies, they will go after one another. Okay, so this is the problem when you have this, which is not, this is reserved for the Muslim ruler, and you can't just establish a Muslim ruler and the people aren't, you know, you're going to establish one here in Seattle, we're going to have one in Bellevue, we're going to have one in Kirkland, we're going to have one in California, we're going to have one, you know, you see the problem and the Hizbiyah that results from that. And this is one of the, even though they might have had good intention, but it's kind of one of the problems that a lot of these groups fell into, and it had a lot of different repercussions because of that. Again, these issues go back to who? To the Muslim ruler. The Muslim ruler decides this, not your jama'ah, not your group, not your hizb, not your partisans group, not your sect necessarily. Okay, all of these things, they lead to a greater harm when splitting from the main body of Muslims. And it shows us also the need as Muslim minorities to have leadership in our countries, and also perhaps the need for hijrah, you know, to a Muslim land where you can at least be under a Muslim ruler. Now, in the next principle, so the next point, Imam Ahmad, rahmatullahi alayhi, he mentions, he says, "Laysa li ahad an yat'ana alayhim wa la yunazi'ahum." It is not for anyone to revile them or dispute with them. Again, he's talking about the Muslim leaders, that no one should be speaking about and being a source of fitna for the Muslim rulers. This is one of the big issues that you find now in our society, especially in cyberspace, especially in the social media world and what have you, of now, you know, because everyone has a microphone, then everyone can, you know, compile, everyone can make videos, make clips, speak openly about Muslim rulers that they maybe have never been in those lands before, but yet they can make takfeer of them. They can say, well, this is not right, and this according to the Sharia, and this and this and this, and they don't even ever have to study. They can just be in their living room their whole time and have, you know, barely got out of high school, and they can make fatwa around the earth about this being halal, this being haram, this one is a disbeliever, this one is a mubtadi'ah. And this is the grave danger that we have. But as Imam Ahmad said, and this was in his time, rahmatullahi alayhi rahmatan wasiyah, it is not for anyone to revile them or dispute with them. No one should be arguing and disputing with the ruler and being open about their attacks on the Muslim rulers. Sheikh Muhyiddin comments, he says, I say, this is due to what it contains from evil and fitna and sins, corruption and chaos, the full extent of which is not known by anyone except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning it has so many repercussions and so much damage, only Allah knows to what extent this chaos goes. We've seen the children of chaos, so to speak. Regarding this blessed nation, the nation of Tawheed, the nation of the family of Saud, Sheikh bin Baz, rahmatullahi alayhi, mentioned, and this nation, all praise due to Allah, is such that nothing emanates from it that obligates rebellion against it. None deems it permissible to rail against the government except the Khawarij, who declare Muslims to be disbelievers due to sins. He also mentioned, if the rulers were to command with disobedience, then they are not to be obeyed in disobedience, but it is not permissible to rebel against them due to it. He also mentioned, this indicates that it is not permissible to dispute with the rulers or to rebel against them except those for whom you see clear disbelief, in which case you will have an evidence from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Imam bin Baz, rahmatullahi alayhi, was talking about the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and he was also mentioning statements based on nusus. Based on nusus, we can find divine text, meaning statements of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, which are almost lefdian, almost the same words in everything. Sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wasallam. Imam Ahmad goes on to say, and the sadaqah is to be given to them, and this is permissible and binding. He who gives it to them has fulfilled his obligation, whether they are righteous or wicked. Again, Imam Ahmad is mentioning all kinds of specific duties which return back to the Muslim ruler. So Sheikh Muhyiddin says, the term sadaqah here refers to the obligatory zakat, that you pay it to the leader. Not for him to put in his pocket, but he collects, they have sadaqah, they have, what do you call it? Zakat collectors and what have you. The Muslim is to give this to the appointed ruler of the land in which he lives and upon whom the people are united, meaning the people of authority and influence. And this removes the obligation from him and frees him from blame. And this has exonerated him before Allah, the Majestic and High, whether that ruler is righteous or wicked, a sinner or one who is obedient. This does not harm the one who has paid the zakat at all before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as is reported in the narration where the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said, alayhim ma hamalu wa alaykum ma hamaltum. For them is what they bear, and upon you is what you bear. So that's very important also to understand this. And I'm glad the Sheikh mentioned this narration because I've thought about this before and this narration. And now at least we have this narration, and it's from it's in Sahih Muslim. It's actually a narration in Sahih Muslim from Wa'il bin Hujr, radiyallahu ta'ala an. And so here we see that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam is saying, hey, when the leader, don't think he's not going to be held accountable, but that's between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's just, you need to focus on yourself. That doesn't mean we just totally disregard and we don't have concern. We have concern about our country if you live in a Muslim country or the Muslim countries in general. You want good for them. You supplicate for the imam and so forth. But however, you also have to realize that their politics and their whatever, all of that and their actions and their rulership, it all returns back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They'll be held accountable for what they did. They'll be rewarded for what they did of good, and they'll be held accountable for what they did of evil. So it is not for you to get on the minbar and spend your time and your efforts and your energy on that, especially as the laypersons. You don't have any role in that. Or and the scholars, when they're analyzing the Shari'i and looking at what's going on, that they take this thing if they have a place where they can approach the ruler or approach the people in the people of position in the society that go to the ruler, however the mechanics of their society is, that they address it through those means. They don't get on the minbar and shout and say, wow, the Muslim ruler did this, he's an evil shaitan, this and this and this, blah, 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 blah. No, they don't cause that, because that causes the hatred of the general people against the leaders, and it causes the breakdown of the society. It's not like in a so-called free society or so-called democratic society. They're whole different pillars of what builds the society. They are whole different pillars on what builds the society. He goes on to mention, and praying the Jumu'ah prayer behind him or behind the one he appoints is sound and complete, as being 2 rak'ah. The one who repeats them is an innovator, who has abandoned the narrations and opposed the Sunnah. He has no portion of the Jumu'ah prayer if he does not see prayer behind the imams, whether they are righteous or wicked, to be correct. The Sunnah is that one prays 2 rak'ah with them, and that he worships Allah with the belief that they are sound, and there is nothing from doubt in his heart regarding that. Meaning, as long as they are Muslim, you have to pray behind them without doubt. Okay. The Shaykh mentions, he says, I say the prayer is the greatest pillar of Islam after the 2 testimonies, meaning the Shahadatain. And there is no portion of Islam for the one who abandons it due to its great status. It was made obligatory in the heavens on the night of Isra from Allah's bounty upon the believers is that he made it an obligation, the congregational prayer, to be established in the masajid, in his expansive land. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ibadi alladhina amanu inna ardi wasi'a fi iyaya fa'budun. O my slaves who believe, certainly spacious is my earth, therefore worship me alone. And he has specified Jumu'ah with increased virtue. It is the best of the days of the week, and Adam alayhi salatu wasalam was created on it. The hour shall be established on it, and there is an hour of response when dua is accepted during it. Jumu'ah prayer is obligatory as 2 rakat along with the khutbah as a reminder and admonition. The heedless hearts are reminded, and the sleeping minds are awakened to what Allah loves and what Allah hates. The Imam delivers a sermon and prays the prayer, either leading it himself or one whom he appoints. The Muslims gather for it in the lands in which they reside. He who established it has established the religion, and he who squanders it has squandered his religion. This is also very important. So that's why the scholars, they mention Sha'air al-Islam, that is one of the signs that Islam is in those lands, is the Jumu'ah prayer. If you live in a place and there's no such thing as a Jumu'ah, or there's no Jumu'ah there, you travel to a land, then it shows you, this is obviously a negative and dead land in that sense. And the signs that the Muslims reside there is going to be the Jumu'ah. And when it's out in the open, those are some of the signs that some of the scholars mention, are some of the signs that of the Muslim land. Therefore, establishing it with the Imam of the Muslims and their general population is from the greatest of the signposts of Islam and its pillars. The shaitan is played with the people, those whom he has led astray in this life of this world, while they think they are doing good. From the deviant groups, do not see Jumu'ah and the congregational prayers with the oppressive rulers to be binding. And I told you about the story of my situation of meeting an extreme takfeeree from Jordan, who, when I was in the UAE, who refused to pray in the masajid. He said they're all masjid darar, they're all the masjids of the hypocrites. And he, of course, more or less, he didn't say I was he didn't make takfir of me, but he was more or less implying that just I'm misguided, something like this. And he made takfir of all the, of course, the rulers, the police, government officials, and the imams of the masajid. And then the muezzin is a hypocrite, and the people are hypocrites for praying behind the imam. So this was his concept, and that's why he didn't pray salat in the masajid. So that means Jumu'ah, means the regular salats. When we heard the adhan, he walked away, and me and my brother, we walked to the masjid. Wallahu musta'an. This is because they deemed this ruler to be a disbeliever, and thus they have gone astray and led others astray. Due to this, Imam Ahmad, rahimahullah ta'ala, mentioned this principle, and is agreed upon amongst As-Sunnah, the people of Islam, that it is obligatory to attend the Jumu'ah prayer, as well as the congregational prayer behind the rulers, even if they are oppressive and have sins and disobedience with them. This does not prevent the prayer behind them. Upon them is their oppression and their sin, whereas the prayer is for us and for them. Likewise, Ahl-Sunnah does not see it permissible to repeat the prayer after having prayed it with them. Indeed, this is an innovation that the extremists from those who are rigid have invented, although they are lighter in their deviation than the aforementioned group. However, they are upon error and misguidance. Due to this, Imam Ahmad, rahmatullah alayhi, mentioned this, and he also stated that there should not be any worry or hesitation in your heart regarding the correctness of the prayer behind them, meaning the sinful rulers, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. And although Imam Ahmad is going to continue, we'll have that for in the next sitting. We'll continue almost wrapping up this beautiful blessed treatise, but we will get into, it's still a continuation. He's talking about the Muslim rulers and about the Caliphate and things like this. And it shows you how serious this bab is, this thing is. So when you have Mubtadi'ah, that come and talk about, easily just discuss taking people out of Islam and taking out the rulers and this and that and the other. You see the hatred that they foment in the hearts of the believers, and you see that it's not a light matter. Look how much attention has been devoted in this treatise, as well as many others, about the issue of praying behind the Muslim rulers, making jihad behind the Muslim rulers, and paying zakat to the Muslim rulers and so forth, and obedience to the Muslim rulers. And all of the narrations from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, wa qabla hadha, and even before that, is the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to follow and obey the Muslim ruler, those charged in authority over us. So it shows us how serious it is, but yet these people flaunt it, and it's easy for them to speak about anything they want in the religion recklessly. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us and guide them and protect us from any and all forms of evil. I mean, Ya Rabbil Alameen. If there's any questions, especially relevant to what we talked about, then inshallah ta'ala, we will try our best to deal with them. Now, what to say to a person who says, I don't know if the rulers are Muslim or not. I don't get involved or talk about those things as too much fitna, confusion. I focus on myself. Allah knows best. So there is no harm that a person does not want to be. In fact, this is praiseworthy that they don't want to be involved in those discussions. But however, perhaps it would be better for them to clarify their statement and just say, hey, I don't speak about the Muslim rulers, and I don't believe all the rulers are disbelievers as these other deviants, or they could just keep away from it. So it's not a point that we have to nudge them and they have to say something that we are pleased with. But the whole point is there is good in what they say of just being away from the fitna and the people of fitan who cause discord and disharmony about it. They're speaking, if they don't know, they don't know. No. See something? Oh, maybe I missed some things. Khawarij going right. How can we get swole? I talked about this issue, and if someone wants to work out, they should work out and take care of themselves. Take care of yourself physically, mentally, and spiritually. The best, strongest believers, those strongest in Iman, of course. So taking care of yourself, eating healthy, and taking care of yourself physically, mentally, and spiritually is imperative as a believer. So that way you can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala better. Getting swole, when you think about it too, getting big, meaning getting, where you look strong, has nothing to do with you being able to fight. There are many people who are big who don't know how to fight. Fighting and those martial arts are skills. Those are skills that a person has to learn, no matter how swole. In fact, you'll find that there's a lot of people who get swole because they can't fight. So getting big can be a deterrent sometimes. Sometimes that can keep some people at bay. But the reality is, the best thing is to be able to defend yourself, to know how to fight, maybe know some martial arts, know some things like this. Does Dar al Harb mean we could get right hand positions? Those are things you don't really need to think about. But Dar al Harb, if in case you know or you don't know, this means the land of war. That means when there's jihad, fi sabilillah, and there are prisoners and captives there. How do I stay steadfast and patient upon Toba? So this is the same thing we mentioned. I feel sad and depressed. Again, if someone has made Toba, then the way that they stay steadfast is continually surrounding themselves with good company and practicing good deeds, and dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, reciting the Quran and doing things to replace that which will lead you astray, and people that will lead you astray, and environments that will lead you astray. Now, who was the greatest in knowledge, according to knowledge, between Al-Albani bin Baz? So those are not really beneficial, what can I say, questions. In fact, those are all imams of Ahl-Sunnah, and they all had different strengths. And so some people that ask, who's the most knowledgeable in our thing? Who's this? Who's that? None of that stuff, it means zero. It means nothing. And it's an opinion anyway. But even with that, they all had different strengths and benefits. If you want to know who is the most knowledgeable in hadith, who you're going to go back to, it's already known. You will go back to Imam Al-Albani for authenticity of hadith and so forth. And Imam bin Uthaymeen was a faqih, and Imam bin Baz was an imam, a mu'min. So they all were great imams that you can benefit from their works, and their works are kathir, or so much. Naam. Like those questions. Is MBS Salafi? Ask him. I don't know. Ask him. How do I become eloquent when giving dawah to non-Muslims? What types can you give? Being eloquent, that's a skill. That's a skill of learning how to speak, educating yourself through reading and writing, your language, your style, your presentation. Those are things that you acquire. Those are acquired skills, and people can work on those skills. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has favored some people to be very charismatic, that they might have those traits. They might have certain traits like that. So generally, most people who do have those skills, though, you'll find that they're usually well read, that they read a lot and have read a lot and studied a lot. And this is how they refined, they had those skills. For me, someone who was in the English language, of course, would be Malcolm X, Allah yarhamahu, as he's a Muslim, died as a Muslim, and so forth. Walhamdulillah, Allah yarhamahu. But he was one of the most profound speakers and someone who impacted me greatly, and that his speaking wasn't learned and acquired through university. It was the university of the streets, and probably his early studies and academics as a young child. That always, if you have a strong usool, it comes out, it manifests itself. And then obviously his education in prison, memorizing the dictionary and things like this gave him his ability. And so he had the ability to, as we say, the gift to gab, the ability to be able to speak and speak eloquently and debate with the highest level, at the highest level, with people from the most elite universities who tried to debunk him. And he could often destroy them in a variety of ways with his knowledge and his eloquence and his eloquence and his charisma. Now, when are we going to have a class meetup barbecue? I don't know. I'm assuming that you must be in Seattle. Will you be having another sitting today? Allahu alam. Sometimes, alhamdulillah, I feel Allah has blessed me with an eloquent speech, but sometimes I worry I am pretentious in my speech. Any advice? Just be humble. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you with something like this, then use it in khair. That's the main thing. Use it for da'wah ila Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because people respect that. And also, depending on the environment that you're in, you can have a great impact upon people if you're eloquent and you can speak their language, and you can and you can hold their attention. Now, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Almighty, to accept our good and forgive our evil. Wa sallallahu wa sallam على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.